The UAW announcing an unexpected expansion of that strike on the Big Three. This time they're hitting Ford where it counts.
This time hitting Ford's biggest truck building plant in Kentucky. It is the automaker's most profitable plant, bringing in around $25 billion each.
China's kind of using Mexico as a test drive for their big and ambitious American plans. Is that fair to say?
57% of respondents said they were not likely to purchase an EV.
S&P Global forecasts EV sales to surpass 4.6 million by the end of the decade.
All that and more, so let's get to it.
The UAW announcing an unexpected expansion of that strike on the Big Three. This time they're hitting Ford where it counts. It's Kentucky truck plant.
It is the largest plant Ford has in the world. It is probably, by most in the industry, consider it the most profitable auto plant of any automaker in the United States. I mean, this is where 19.7% of their volume comes out of the Kentucky truck plant. And oh, by the way, the stamping facility and the parts that are coming out of the Kentucky truck plant, they feed into about 13 other facilities upstream.
All this says to me is that the UAW means business. More importantly, Jim Farley can't afford for this factor to be down any longer than it has to be. This leads me to believe that Ford and the UAW are going to come to some ramshod way to fix this. Pressure's on, folks, and something's gotta give.
Go ahead.
Phil, I thought Ford, they're telling us to wrap, but I thought Ford was supposed to be the one that they were making the most progress with. Why this big hit on them?
Becky, look, that narrative has been there for a few weeks. We've done a number of stories saying this narrative about Ford being well above everybody, well further along than other people. I'm not sure where that narrative comes from, Becky. I'm being honest with you. We've done stories saying there's nobody who is further along than somebody else.
I thought they had offered a higher
I understand what
increase.
you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about anybody being near. I just thought that they were the ones that were maybe potentially closest to a deal.
I would say there are elements of what they are offering that you could look at it and say they are farther along than others. But let's be clear here. The UAW wants the battery plants that are being planned organized under the same master contract. And that's not happening at this point, according to Ford, GM, and Stellantis. That's the major dividing line between whether or not we see an agreement or not.
Something tells me we're going to get there a lot faster now that the Kentucky plant is down on the mat. Get the cut man ready, because this is not going to be pretty.
The United Auto Workers Union expanding its strike again, this time hitting Ford's biggest truck building plant in Kentucky. It is the automaker's most profitable plant, bringing in around $25 billion each year. Analysts have previously said the strike hasn't been that concerning because truck plants have been spared until now. David Whiston, Auto's equity strategist and Morningstar Research, joins us now. So, David, let me ask you, this feels like a fairly significant escalation here. Is this how you saw it?
Yes, definitely. This is basically with the Detroit 3, it's all about full-size SUVs and pickup trucks. And with Kentucky Truck, you're really going after both because you're getting part of the F-Series franchise with the Super Duty production, but then also Expedition and Lincoln Navigator. Probably not a surprise given last week the UAW said they were on the verge of striking GM Arlington, Texas, where they make all their full-size SUVs. So unfortunately, there's probably more to come on this as soon as tomorrow.
I mean, David, what does this tell us about what's going on behind the scenes in the negotiations? Does it signal that there's not progress, and that's why the UAW felt like it had to make this move? And does this then, in turn, put more pressure on Ford and really, get them to make a deal?
Yeah, Ford had a press conference actually just before we went on the air here, and I was listening to it, and they, from the Ford perspective, they thought they were making progress on issues like the battery JV plants and retirement benefits. The union clearly feels differently, and I think the union's just taking a more absolutist approach of, if we don't get what we want, we just keep escalating the strike. And this week it's full-size SUVs, and then I think now that we're into the most lucrative vehicles and probably Ford's most profitable plant, this plant does roughly $5 billion a year in EBIT for Ford. The question that, and hopefully management has already made a decision here, but what they need to do at all three firms is decide, do they want to end this strike soon and perhaps give in to avoid the bleeding in pickups and full-size SUVs? Or are they willing to wait this out? And to wait it out, they're going to have to lever up the company probably. And the math is, I think, on their side to do that, but you have to take a lot more debt. That's going to in turn drive your stock price down quite a bit.
Ooh, that is not a good situation. One, you need to be ramping up production of your battery electric vehicles as soon as possible. Acquiring more debt that is not associated with the production of battery electric vehicles? I don't have to tell you. That's not a good idea. Transition to EVs should be the only thing you're having to worry about right now, because you're not going to be able to do it very well in the first place. This is only going to hinder your already slow process in this transformation. There's no guarantee you will survive. It can't be about the short-term profits right now. You gotta look 5-10 years in the future and where you're going to be standing when it comes to battery electric vehicles.
So I'm just curious who you think has leverage right now in this fight. You know, I look at UAW, Sean Fain, and he's seeing the same polls I am. There's a recent one from the AP, David, saying a majority of Americans support higher pay for auto workers. He knows he's got the president of the United States on his side. Biden has shown clear solidarity there. And given this targeted strategy he has of when to strike, he's not exhausting his strike fund. Do you think Fain actually is in pole position here? Who has the leverage?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what we were just talking about. It depends. Do the automakers, are they willing to let the strike go a long time and lever up the company? If so, I think the automakers ultimately have the upper hand.
Oh no, that is a facade. The longer this strike goes, the worse it'll be for everyone involved. UAW, Detroit 3, the suppliers down the line.
Though right now I think it does look like the union's winning because they keep getting more concessions. But as the union keeps escalating, that increases the depletion rate on the strike fund to the point where if you shut down all the Detroit 3 at once, even when the strike fund was full, you had, I think, roughly 6 or 8 weeks. I can't remember the number exactly of calc, but $500 a week of strike pay, even if they're not paying healthcare, $500 a week of strike pay, $825 million to start. That depletes very quickly when you're talking about roughly 146,000 people. So it just depends on, will the automakers be willing to let the strike go a long time, or do they want to end this soon? But if you're talking, in order to end this soon, if you have to do things like pensions, retire your healthcare, I don't think they're willing to do that because they know it's going to kill them.
Every American EV maker not named Tesla are struggling with rising inventory and slowing customer demand. But now a new Motor Trend documentary highlights how China may be trying to use Mexico as a kind of end around to get into the American car market.
What?
In the last 3 years, 9 Chinese car makers, BYD, Chery, SAIC Motors, and more, have set up shop in Mexico. Chinese branded and manufacturing cars, now nearly 10% of all the vehicles sold there, up from 0% a couple of years ago. Let's bring in the Motor Trend editor who traveled to Mexico City for this investigation and reporting, Miguel Cortina. Miguel, good to have you on. I'm a car fanatic, so I watched it. Great stuff. It feels like, to use an auto term, China's kind of using Mexico as a test drive for their big and ambitious American plans. Is that fair to say?
At first, you might be like, ooh, Chinese brand? I don't want nothing to do with that. Until you do. These EVs are going to be compelling as from a design aspect and from a price standpoint. This should be sending alarm bells throughout the entire 313 area code.
That's absolutely right, Brian. They have set up shop in Mexico, and what these automakers now are doing is they're going to be building plants in Mexico and using the USMCA agreement to come to the U.S. tax-free. So it's obviously a big advantage that they are setting. They have done a lot, very, very well in Mexico. I mean, like you just said, almost 10% of market share. 4 years ago, they had 0% of market share. So,
hello? 0% to 9%? Oh, that sounds like some exponential type growth there. Nothing to be concerned with. Carry on.
So they've made a huge impact in Mexico, and now they're going to be using, the big bet is on the U.S., right? Mexico is a big producer of cars, and that's only because the U.S. is the #2 car market in the world. Basically, all of the exports from Mexico are coming into the U.S., and now the Chinese want to play in that game.
And I got to imagine for Detroit, this is also a concern. We know the Mustang Mach-E is made in Mexico, but if you're going to face, you're already facing cost issues around EVs. Many, if not most, are losing money on every car they sell, but don't worry, Miguel, they'll make it up in volume. But now if you got China coming in, you know, with these cars, super low cost, super low, probably not great cars, but they're cheap and you can get around in them, it's going to cause a lot of cost pressure for the American manufacturers.
That's one hell of an assumption, assuming that the Chinese vehicles will be cheap. If you've watched any of Sandy Monroe's teardowns of battery electric vehicles, you understand that everybody's cars are fairly cheap when you compare them to a Tesla. Are you telling me that these Chinese automakers are making the cars worse than Ford, GM, Hyundai? I mean, the bar isn't very high unless you're comparing it to a Tesla. 0% 4 years ago to damn near 10% now? Something tells me people aren't giving a whether or not these things have the perception of being cheap. The real question is, how many of them will be return buyers? That's the statistic that I really want to know. If you buy a BYD vehicle, how likely are you to buy one in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, that's also what we found out in our reporting in Mexico City, is that these automakers, Ford, Chevy, Stellantis, they are already suffering in Mexico because of the arrival of the Chinese, right? And other established players in the automotive world, the Europeans, Volkswagen, BMW, even the luxury players, are already seeing, a slip in their market share. And that's just because the Chinese have come in with really, to use another analogy here, wide open throttle, and they are just making a lot of noise. I also want to point out, we did have a chance to drive a couple of those Chinese EVs. We drove a BYD Yuan Plus, and we were quite impressed with the quality that they have.
What? Impressed with the quality? That's not what I've been told. The Chinese make cheap cars, not high quality cars. You must be mistaken.
I mean, this was a car, a crossover the size of a Toyota RAV4, more or less, with 300 miles of range. And it's also cheaper than what a Honda CR-V hybrid sells in Mexico, except this is an all EV, a complete electric EV.
This is what I'm talking about. You won't know it until it happens. It'll be cheaper and surprisingly higher quality than any of the consumers expect. What do you think's gonna happen when these things start hitting the American shores? I really don't want a Tesla, but I can't seem to purchase the Ford, or I can't get the GM vehicle. Oh, this Chinese thing looks really nice. It looks cool. Oh man, it has nice quality too. I'll give it a whirl. Let's see how this works. Scene. That's how it's going to go if the Detroit 3 don't step it up.
So you were pretty happy. How far did you drive it, Miguel? I've driven about 5 or 6 EVs, and we always talk about the range, but you were happy with the car that you got from BYD?
We were, yes. I think it was on par with the quality that we would expect from an American automaker or any other automakers that is here in the U.S. I would even say maybe a little better quality than some.
Wow.
The 300 miles of range, that's an estimate on the a European cycle, which is a little bit more optimistic than the EPA. But I drove it from Mexico City to Puebla, which is about 82 miles away, and then back. The range was pretty good. I had it for 2 weeks while I was down there reporting for this documentary. And honestly, I didn't have any issues as far as range concerned. Mexico doesn't have a big EV charging stations implementation like here in the US. So it was a little bit hard to charge.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think the range from the battery that BYD also makes themselves was very good.
These Chinese automakers are coming. Don't get it twisted.
Well, time now to talk about EVs and the road ahead. For those in the market for a new car, how many are on the market for an electric vehicle? Yahoo Finance's Pras Subramanian hopefully has the answer for us with the results of our new poll. Pras, we're talking about EVs already making up roughly 8% of the overall U.S. market. How much more can it expand given the current firms?
Well, according to our new poll done with Yahoo Finance and Ipsos, I don't know how much more can go beyond that, at least as of right now. We polled over 1,000 people here from at the end of September and beginning of October, and it found that 57% of respondents said they were not likely to purchase an EV, whether it was a new EV or new to them. Only 31% said they were likely to purchase an EV. Now, EV is defined as a plug-in electric or a fully electric car. I've been tracking these polls for some time now, and usually it's around 50%. So to see that slight downtick to 57% or more negativity is sort of new here. Drilling down deeper, we're seeing some of the same concerns that we've heard about before. 70% are worried about overall cost. 73% are concerned about driving range, and 77% noted a lack of charging stations or perceived lack of charging stations. So
I'm gonna tell you like this, if you're not looking for charging stations, you're not going to see charging stations. And while it is true that they're not on every street corner like a nail shop or a donut shop, there are probably more places to charge than you realize.
And also I want to mention, Americans aren't happy about mandates to sort of kill gas-powered cars. 61% of people oppose those restrictions. So, but there is a silver lining though for governments and people that want to sort of see the EV expansion here in the country continue. Basically, only 20% are aware of recent price cuts of EVs, like for instance Ford cars and Tesla EVs, and the same amount, 20% are aware of charging deal expansions, right? So Tesla's expansion of its supercharger network to other automakers, they're not aware of that, but that's happening. So education is sort of key here if the country's going to see, the Biden administration's 50% mandate of EVs by 2030.
Just know, over time, these numbers will increase. There may be little pockets of dips here and there between now and the end of the decade. The trend will be overwhelmingly sure that they're going to go to a hybrid or a battery electric vehicle in the future. That number will go higher, more than likely in lockstep with the production of battery electric vehicles.
Yeah, and especially if the concern is cost, educating consumers on the fact that there's a generous $7,500 incentive there, at least for new EVs. What did you find in terms of brands that prospective buyers are looking at right now? Tesla has been leading the way. What are some others that have gained?
So we asked about what brand people would consider if they were to buy an electric vehicle in the future and as their next car. And I was surprised to see that Toyota tops the list at 30%.
Consumers most likely to purchase a Toyota EV? This is surprising. Well, I guess Toyota has a huge lineup of EVs here in America and are going to unveil them shortly, right? Is there an opportunity here? Oh, maybe later.
Tesla was next at 23%, so they're a little bit behind Toyota, and even though Tesla's the biggest player in the market right now. Honda at 20%, they don't even have any EVs out yet, right? So,
damn! This is a huge example of how misinformed the consumer actually is. They're just looking for the next commercial to sway their opinion.
So GM at 15%, that's going to be ramping up second half of the year. And Ford, of course, has had EVs on the market for a couple of years now. So Ford, they're rounding out the top 5 of the marks that we've seen.
Electric vehicles already account for 8% of new car sales in the U.S., but a new report says the number is expected to more than double, in part because of federal incentives. S&P Global forecasts EV sales to surpass 4.6 million by the end of the decade.
That number's pretty low. By 2030, Tesla's going to be well over 4.6 million vehicles by themselves. Prime example of how they are going to miss the estimate yet again. You might as well double that figure and you'll be closer to the mark.
Even as drivers raise concerns about the range and cost of cars. One association trying to drive more EV change in U.S. policy is the Zero Emission Transportation Association, better known as ZETA, an industry-backed coalition advocating for full adoption of EVs by 2030. Let's bring in Zero Emission Transportation Association Executive Director Al Gore III. It's good to talk to you today. We're at nearly 10% adoption right now. You could argue that first 10% is always a little easier. What's the key driver to get to 20%?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Akiko. It's great to be here. I would argue maybe the first 10% is the hardest when we're talking about a new technology. But I think we're moving beyond the early adopters, and that's an important point. The last 2 years have been the most productive in terms of public policy regarding electric vehicles in our history. The bipartisan infrastructure law included billions of dollars for a national electric vehicle charging network through the NEVI program. Those funds are being sent out to states now. Last year, the Inflation Reduction Act included enormous manufacturing and consumer incentives. And there's an intense focus now on upstream supply chain for minerals and batteries. And all of that is going to bring a lot of jobs into the United States and of course, drive further adoption. But I think just last week we had guidance on transferability of the credits, which will create on the hood incentives for consumers and really simplify the process. And that's going to be great for the entire auto industry, dealers and consumers together. So a lot of work still to be done, but the pace is really accelerating very quickly.
If you thought the tax credits benefited EV sales before, wait till you get a load of them next year when they're right on the sticker price.
This push towards electrification, of course, is a global race that we're seeing right now. If you consider the federal goal here being roughly 50% adoption by the end of this decade.
That's going to be low, ladies and gentlemen. 50%, that is a low number.
Do we have the resources and the parts in place to make that happen, considering you've got China, you've got European countries, I mean, you've got a global push to move in the same direction?
The answer is yes, we do. It's going to take work. And that's where the focus on the upstream supply chain is really, really important. So we need to move a lot more quickly in creating new sources of minerals, new processing capacity, new battery manufacturing capacity. I think currently there is a global supply chain outside of China even, but everybody is working to build, expand, and secure their supply chains among our trusted trade partners, and grow this manufacturing capacity here as quickly as possible. We do have the resources to do it. It's going to take effort, and that effort is well underway. There have been tens of billions of dollars invested in upstream capacity since the passage of the IRA, and it's going to bear fruit over the next several decades.
Without expansion, then no, we wouldn't have enough. The supply chain would not be able to support the growing demand, the exponential growth of battery electric vehicles. Good thing we're not just sitting on our hands, folks. Tesla realized this way back when they built Giga 1. For us to accomplish our goals, we're going to have to build a facility ourselves because there's no way we'd be able to complete our goals with the current capacity. They didn't see anybody else expanding the supply chain, so they built it themselves. Tesla pleaded for people to process lithium. You could print money if you get into the lithium business. They said it for like 2 straight years on calls. They saw no progress in this arena. Guess what? They did it themselves. For Tesla to reach their lofty goals of 20 million cars produced in 2030, there's no way they can achieve that without expanding their factories, the supply chain, and their own battery production. You can't get these materials out of thin air. There has to be work done. In conclusion, the UAW is hitting forward right where it counts. You must be smoking the glass if you think that Ford, GM, Stellantis are in control of this situation. The longer you hold out, the closer the competition gets to your shores. The Chinese are in North America with about 10% in the Mexican auto market. Is no one else concerned about this? No matter what polls you look at saying that EVs aren't wanted by the public, just know that most Americans are going to need that stepping stone of a hybrid vehicle. EV incentives by the IRA can't help but improve EV adoption, but the key takeaway is the vast majority of estimates about EV adoption are ridiculously off the mark. There it goes. There is opportunity in this oversight. Question is, do you just believe their numbers or have you run your own? That's all I have for you today. Be easy. Peace.